So I've always been like a stage monkey, but nothing that was maybe like that clicked completely for me. But then when I found this, and since I've always liked writing, and this was writing with performance, and it was like a whole different thing, I was like, okay, I need to try this. I want to do that. Like, that's really cool.
This is a podcast called Walk, Talk, Listen. An attempt to connect people and make this world a bit better by sharing opinions and experiences based on the belief that everyone's perspective is true, albeit partial. My name is Maurice Blom, and I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen. Good day, everybody. This is another episode of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. And as always, I'm delighted with today's guest, who will introduce herself. Antonia, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Antonia Eriksson. My stage name, or the name I go by, is Antonia the Poet, and I'm a spoken word poet based in Stockholm, Sweden. So I do that, which is like my passion project and the thing I want to do the most. But I also study social work, so I'm at uni doing that at the same time. But yeah, my main thing in life is the poetry. So I do spoken word poetry, and with my own poems, and I perform them at different events. So that's what I do. But who I am, I guess, is a completely separate question, really. I grew up in Sweden. I have a mum who's British and a dad who's Swedish. So I've spoken English at home my entire life. It's my first language. But I've been in Sweden my entire life. I grew up in a small town. Really wanted to move away as quickly as possible. So when I was in my 20s, I moved to Stockholm, the capital. So that's where I live now, and I'm very happy here. Yeah, I mean, that's a short intro.
And so are your how do you think that mix, so the British and Swedish, how did that make you who you are, and how is that informing also the work, your poems and your art?
Yeah, I mean, when I was younger, I didn't really reflect over the fact that I spoke a different language at home very much. It was quite natural to me to just switch between languages. I think the one thing that I realized the cultural difference is, for example, Christmas. In Sweden, you celebrate Christmas on the 24th. In England, you celebrate Christmas on Christmas Day on the 25th. And I always found that a challenge. My mum didn't want to celebrate Christmas on Christmas Eve. So while all my friends were celebrating Christmas, we were waiting for the next day to celebrate Christmas. But otherwise, I don't think that like the difference between Swedish and English culture wasn't really there very much. But it gave me an understanding for language, if nothing else. And like having two languages has been really helpful. And with my poetry, I write the majority of my poetry in English. And I think I heard a psychologist say that your mother tongue is your emotional language. So the language you grow up speaking is the easiest like way for you to talk about your emotions is through your mother tongue. So, and I think that kind of explains why a lot of my poetry is in English, because it's very emotional, and I find that I get it out better in English than in Swedish. So that's helped me with my poetry a lot, and a lot of my creative work in general. It's been really nice to have the English language.
Tell us a bit about your poetry, because you're saying, it's very emotional, and I've seen you perform. It's great, but it's very personal. At the same time, it also connects it with wider issues. So yeah. So when did you start writing poems, and when then did you decide that you wanted to share those poems with the wider world? Because that's a big step, I think,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, I've written my entire life. So when I was a child, I'd write like little stories or little songs, and I've always been a writer. But I didn't find like spoken word poetry until quite late in my life. It was about 5 or 6 years ago now. And I found it by coincidence. So I love watching TED Talks, and I watched a TED Talk with a teacher called Sarah Kay. And at the end of her TED Talk, she read a spoken word poem. And I was just blown away by the performance, the way you could deliver a message that way. It was so creative. And it was, I mean, it's all about stage presence and how you use your body and how you speak and how you intonate words. But it's also about the words you're actually speaking. So it's larger than just written poetry because it's an entire performance. And I was so moved by what she did. And I've always been, well, partly really creative, but I've also been on stage a lot. I danced classical ballet for 13 years and was on stage with that. I sang a lot, so I've been on stage singing. So I've always been like a stage monkey, but nothing that was maybe like that clicked completely for me. But then when I found this, and since I've always liked writing, and this was writing with performance, and it was like a whole different thing, I was like, okay, I need to try this. I want to do that. Like, that's really cool. I'd love to do that. So I just started experimenting and started writing what could be spoken word poetry, I guess. But I only read it for my family. And in Sweden, there wasn't, and weirdly also in Stockholm, there wasn't really a big stage for spoken word poetry. It was very hard to find open mics or events or things like that. So I Googled around, I read my poetry for my family. They're like, it's really good. You should pursue this. You should find an open mic. And I couldn't find one. So I ended up going to a spoken word like performance at the theatre in Stockholm. And I went up to the poets afterwards and said, how do I do this? Where do I need to like start so I get to be this person on the stage reading poetry? And they were like, oh, but there's a Swedish championship. And you can go there and watch it, and then you'll meet loads of people who are in the community, and that can maybe help you like get into it. So I Googled the Swedish championships, and then really there are several competitions beforehand in different cities, and the best from each cities go to the Swedish championships, but they also take individual competitors. I think max 4 people for each Swedish championship, and they just allot them at random. So I applied and wasn't one of the ones picked out initially. And then they called me on a Monday and said, we have a whole team that's not coming. So we have 4 spots at the Swedish championships. Do you want to come? And I was like, sure, what do I need? And they were like, oh, you need this and this and this. And I needed like a certain amount of poems. There were loads of rules I needed to follow. And I didn't even have that many poems. So I was like, oh, I need to do something about this. So I said yes, that I'll be there. And then Monday, Tuesday, I just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. And then I showed up at the Swedish championships on Wednesday, and they went on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And I went to the finals. And I think that's when I was like, oh, this is my thing. Like, I'm good at this. So that was like my first introduction. And then I started to find some open stages. I did that. I went to open mics. I competed again, did even better the second time around. And then I also kind of by chance got a really big gig, which was at the Inner Development Goals Summit last year, 2022. They had no idea who I was, but they'd been recommended me because I'm an English-speaking poet, and they wanted an English-speaking poet for the event. And they knew nothing about me, and they contacted me and asked if I had something I thought could be useful. So I sent them some examples, and then I was invited there. And that's kind of my first big, I guess, break. So I could start working with it in a different way. I never thought ever that I'd earn money doing this. It's a hobby for me. It's my passion. I love doing it, but I didn't ever think that I'd actually earn money doing it. So that's been cool to be able to like pursue it as a career as well, and not just a hobby, which has been really special. So yeah.
If it would continue to go well, will you stop with your study or
well, I'm almost done.
Continue to okay.
I'm almost done. I finish next summer. So I've only got 2 terms left really. So I'm writing my thesis now, and then I have a few master classes next term that I have to do. So they're on a higher degree, but I'm going to finish it because
Mhm.
it's important for me to have a fallback as well. And I don't think the poetry necessarily is like, it's not 100% guaranteed work. There are certain periods during the year no one books gigs. There are other periods of the year when every company wants a gig because they have events.
Yeah.
So it's not, yeah, the gigs come and go in different periods, so it's not like a safe, secure income. And I also love what I'm studying, and I can't wait to start working with that as well. So I'm hoping I can combine them, but get to do both of them as much as possible, and preferably as much poetry as possible, but still have the social work there. So that's how I feel about it.
Okay. And I would like to go back to the emotional, because when I checked your Instagram, yeah, you made it a note there that I was there, therefore you saw me searching for the paper. I wrote it down, but something in terms of, because you decided, you made it, there is a remark.
Yeah, I think it goes, the urge to write a poem became stronger than the urge to write a suicide note.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, my writing for me has been therapy in a lot of ways. I go to therapy as well, but the writing has always been there for me. And spoken word, weirdly enough, like it was completely nerve-wracking the first time I read poetry on stage. I broke down crying because I'd read my poems for my family and I'd read them myself, and they didn't really move me in the same way, because when you're reading it for a room full of strangers and you see someone start crying and you realize that, oh, my words have an impact and it's not just me or in my head, and it was this whole emotional experience. So the first times I read poetry on stage, I cried almost every single time, because I was so taken by the emotion in the room and that I could move people with my poetry. And I explain spoken word poetry when I'm on stage as a mass therapy, where I have a bunch of people, everything from like 10 to 500 to 1,000 people in an audience, whose only job is to listen, and they can't question my story. They can't question what I'm telling them. They don't give me advice or tell me like to do this and this or whatever. Like sometimes when you share something with other people, they want to go in and fix it. But with poetry, it's art, so people can't really touch it. What they can say is, your poem moved me, but not, is the poem true, or is it this and this? And all my poetry is true, or it's my own stories. But it's a way to be allowed to tell my story without being interrupted or being told I'm wrong or that my story isn't important. I get to own my story. So it's mass therapy in that way. And then a lot of my poetry come from traumas that I've experienced, and it's a way for me to process them. And I think understand it for myself as well, put things into words, get perspective, work out how I feel about it. And when I share my poetry on stage, it's very raw and vulnerable. But I think that opens up the opportunity for other people to be vulnerable. And I think that's what that drives me a lot in life, that I think we need to be vulnerable. It's how we build connection. It's how we strengthen our communities, our relationships. So I hope that me being vulnerable on stage with my poetry inspires other people to be vulnerable as well. So yeah. So the poetry is very emotional for me, and some poems I cry my way through when I'm writing them. Some I don't. Some are really, really dark, some are not. But it's a way for me to process. So it's really helped me a lot.
No, and I really would invite the audience, the listeners, to check out your poems. You have a YouTube channel now as well, where there are two of your performances. Yeah, the first one that I saw from you actually was live. We will talk about it, about the inner development goals, a little bit later in the conversation. But then I saw on YouTube, I saw the goldfish that you did the year before. That's very personal, and at the same time yeah, I was listening to it and I thought, this must be really helpful for women who have experienced this as well. So it was, yeah, I'd like to commend you for that. So,
Thank you.
So what I also saw is then you had a performance at a birthday party, and you said, this is maybe the only poem that where I'm a little bit funny. And do you think your poems will change in terms of becoming more with to laugh about? Is that happening or no? Because there are still some other things that you need to deal with.
I mean, I think in general, I want to believe I'm quite a funny person, and I'm quirky, and I like to joke a lot, and I like to laugh. So I am quite a quirky person. But a lot of my poetry is like pitch black because it's been processing things I've been through. So I still struggle trying to write like happy poems, because I think it so easily becomes a cliche. Like I've tried to write a love poem, and I feel like it's just I can't take myself seriously, and I'm not a comedian, so if I'm trying to write something funny, it can easily become forced. So finding that balance has been really difficult. So the few poems I have, which I think are a bit funny, are also really dark. So I kind of want the listener to not really be ready for the next step, so they have to stay very focused. So 1 second they're laughing, and the next second I'm kicking them in the guts with something really serious. So you get to go through the emotions, but I don't know. I mean, I hope maybe that I'll find it easier and easier to write about happy things. I'm not in general a really sad person. I have been, but I think I feel better, but it's a challenge for me. I have a really hard time writing about positive emotions for some reason. It's so much easier for me to write about darkness and tough times and trauma. And I think a lot of writers probably recognize themselves in this, and especially poets, that it's in some way it's just easier to explain or write about like the darkness than it is the good stuff.
What I like about your poems, you mention that you need to acknowledge it, right? I mean, there is no light without dark, and I like that around it. When you look at again, I'm talking about the Instagram, because when you see it, there is a certain moment you say rebranding, isn't that?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Is that a moment where you decide to go out with your poems, or what is that moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's that was special because that Instagram from the beginning was called something completely different. And I started it, and that's really a whole separate, quite a long story, but it was called Eat, Move, Improve before. And I started it when I was 17, the same day I was admitted to hospital, almost dying of anorexia. So the first, if you go all the way back in that Instagram, the first picture is of my hospital bed. And then I documented my entire recovery and my way back to health. And that was what that Instagram was. And then that blew up in media, coincidentally, really. And the story spread globally. And I suddenly was this like figure for recovery from eating disorders. And I was interviewed in a bunch of TV programs and radio shows. And I was kind of everywhere with it. And then so I kept that Instagram going while I decided I wanted to be a personal trainer. I did that education. I started working with it. And then that Instagram kind of had a purpose. But when I understood that I don't want to be a personal trainer my entire life, I have all these other things I want to do. And my life isn't just what I eat and how I train, which that Instagram very much was. And I never started it wanting to be an influencer. That was not the point for me at all. It was to find other people who were going through the same thing, who were suffering, who could help me and I could help them, and we could inspire each other to recover. Because there's another really dark side on social media that is, they call it pro Anna, which is like accounts that are giving tips on how to lose weight, how to become skinny, how to do this and this and this and not eat, which is really toxic. I tried to find this like positive community of people uplifting each other, trying to recover instead. And that was really all I needed. I needed that support system from other people who understood me. So when it blew up and I had this huge Instagram and loads of followers, and I was like, I didn't ask for this, and sure, I could have like capitalized on it and gone with it and worked as an influencer today, probably, because it was in like the early days of Instagram. So I was one of the first big influencers in Sweden, but that was never my goal. It never drove me. It was not something I necessarily wanted to do. So a bunch of years later, when I started with my poetry, I had this platform, which I basically wasn't using, where I had all these followers who knew me very well, who had followed me through a really tough time in my life, who I've shared so much with. And this was just another step on my journey. So I rebranded the account to be about my poetry, and whoever wanted to stick around could stick around. But then I'm at least being true to myself and doing something I enjoy doing, and not because it is expected of me. I make content about working out and eating, which is like just a tiny part of my life and who I am. And that pressure was just not for me. So that's why I rebranded the account. So it's a long story, but that's what it was from the beginning. And if you Google Eat, Move, Improve, you'll find loads of news articles from 2012 or whatever it was when this blew up. So yeah, so that's when the rebrand happened, and I went over to posting all my poetry there instead.
Understood. Okay. Yeah, you also made a poem. I think it's called Unsolicited Advice to Teenage Girls. Yeah. So what do you hope that the present teenage girls will get out of your poems? What do you like to tell them? Or warn them for, or prepare?
Yeah, I think it's two parts. That poem is also that was a bit funny, a bit serious. Like it's got both parts, and I've built it completely on my own experiences of stupid shit I did, really, to be rude about or like crass about it, but that was like embarrassing things that had happened to me, but also some of the really dark things that happened to me and difficult things, and I wanted to put them in a poem which was like, okay, this is advice to myself as a teenager that I'm sure I wouldn't have listened to then, but I'm saying now. And I think the point is, and with my poetry in general, because I think I write a lot for especially women, and especially younger girls, I think, is to teach them, or like to give, perspective, and also in somehow nudge towards resilience, that like life sucks and it's really hard, but we can't give up because of that. And that the end of that poem kind of ends with a piece that's about when I was really depressed, and I took a bunch of pills and tried to commit suicide, and it was a really dark time in my life, but I tried to nudge on that in a positive way, to be like, do not give up, keep trying, it will get better, kind of. So I think I just want to inspire people to, I don't know, have hope maybe, and believe in themselves and their resilience. And just because you've been through really horrible things, it doesn't say anything about you as a person. It's not your fault, but it doesn't either mean that you have to carry that with you your entire life. That happened to me, but it's not who I am. And I think that's something I've learned on my own lately. Like, it came quite late, that I think I for a very long time identified myself with my trauma, and it took a lot of therapy, I think, and work with myself to get to a point where I don't identify with my trauma. It happened to me, but it's not me, and I get to choose the course of my life and who I want to be as a person, and it's not dependent on that. Even if it shaped me and who I am, and it's taught me a lot about myself, it's not who I am. So I hope by sharing my experiences and sharing my darkest times, like, other people can recognize themselves in it, maybe find some hope, maybe find some resilience, maybe see, like, because for example, me with my eating disorders, I could have died, and I want to be an example for other people, to be like, you can live this life instead though. Like, this is waiting for you. You just need to go after it. This doesn't have to hold you back and hold you down. You can choose the direction of your life. And I hope, I don't know, but I hope maybe that can nudge someone in the right direction, or inspire them.
I assume that you are getting a lot of messages as a result of what you do in your poems, right? So
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean that alone is great. I When I was listening to you, you said, okay, I had to do a lot of hard work. I've been in therapy. I'm still in therapy. Have there been people in your life that were helpful in getting you, to where you are today, or is it really, no, you need to, yes, of course you have support, but you need to do it ultimately yourself. How do you see that?
I mean, I think a lot of, at least my younger years, I felt like it was a bit me for myself on my own. I thought I had to, I needed a lot of resilience, and for me to get somewhere in my life, it was kind of up to me. I felt the same way with my eating disorders. I was hospitalized, and thank God there is great medical care in Sweden, but I kind of, even if I had my family there, they couldn't really handle it. They couldn't really deal with it. So it was very much me who had to recover for me. And I think there have been a bunch of things like that in my life where I felt like I'm kind of on my own. It's me against the world. But with that said, I also have had a lot of support through my life, and I have a really nice relationship with both my siblings, and we're very close. I have a good relationship with my mom and dad today, but it's had its ups and downs during my life, but we're in a good place now. And I think that is partly because I've done a lot of work with myself, that I can have a relationship with them that's healthy, and where I'm safe and happy. But yeah, so that's been tough. But I've had people who also like have opened doors. I mean, the IDGs, for example, that I got that gig, that was someone who opened a door for me that helped me repel into something I really wanted to do. So I've had that, of course, and I have amazing friends who have been great. So I can't say that I am where I am today is completely dependent on me. It's not, but I think a lot of it has been work I've had to do, and I've had to fight, and like just keep getting back up again. Because I think I felt a lot like life kind of keeps knocking me down, and I have to again and again show myself that like, you've got this, you can do this, you've been through worse, you're all right. So yeah, and done a lot of work there in therapy, for example, to be a better person in other people's life as well, and not let my trauma or what I've been through set the course for my life and my relationships.
So you went through a lot. So if I ask you the question at the moment about what drives you in life, what makes it that you get out of bed in the morning, what would you answer now at the moment?
It's a difficult question. I think partly like I love to live. I think this life is amazing and fun and exciting, and there are so many things to do and experience and see, and that makes me excited. And the people in my life who I care about, I get out of bed for them a lot. And on like a really, really dark day, I think that's what I have to find. And also the grit and like the survivor mode in me to be like, I need to be here, and I need to prove to my younger self or other people in my life that like, I can do this, I can get up, I can keep going. I need to prove that I'm not going to give up. I have to keep fighting. So I think it's like double. Sometimes it's just I love life, and sometimes it's like I need to prove that I can do this, and that my existence is valid almost. So that's almost like a like dark dysfunctional side of it. But then it's also all the people in my life. So it's different day to day, I think, and depending on how I'm feeling. But I mean, making some kind of an impact is very important to me, and I've always wanted to help people. It's what drives me the absolute most. And I think that's why I chose social work, and that's why I read poetry that's very raw and vulnerable and connects with people, because I feel like it makes a difference. And I think that's like my goal in life, or what drives me in life, is just to make some sort of an impact, to do something that matters, that it there's a like it makes a difference that I'm here or not. So I think, yeah, long answer to a short question, but I think that's how I think.
When I talk with more senior people, they say, oh, this younger generation is struggling with mental health issues. I'm not saying that's not true. I think as a world we are struggling, and it has so many. It has to do with the poly crisis. Also maybe the amount of information that you get. You cannot, you cannot cope with it, and so my question to you is around. I mean, I know that going up and down, and you have gone through tough times, and you still are at times. You say, do you see that in your friends of your same, your same generation as well? And and do you think that's true, that the younger generation is more struggling than the older generation?
I think, or with my friends, I think that it's you also, I mean, your community or the people you spend time with are usually also quite a lot like you. So I can't really speak on my entire generation. I can speak on the people I know who are like me, and also have ups and downs. But if I would try to have like a wider perspective on my generation, I think it's yes and no. I think that mental health is big and serious issue, but I also think we're speaking about mental health a lot more, so the issue seems a lot bigger because of that. And that's not like diminishing the fact that it is a big problem, and probably mental health has gotten worse. And I think a lot of research shows that. But I also think we talk about it in a different way now. We get help in a different way. Youths talk about their mental illnesses. It's not as taboo anymore. And I think that can maybe sometimes also give the perception that it's so much worse, and it's not always. And I also think that my generation and the generations below me or coming after me, I think we have a lot of fight in us, and there's a lot of things we want to change and where we think we need change. And I think it's a very driven generation as well. But I think we've all had our struggles. So I mean, in some ways, yes, maybe the mental health is worse. There are different pressures, but also I think we're better at talking about it and better at getting help.
Well, this podcast is a spin-off of a 100-mile walk that I started in 2012 to raise awareness and funds for to end hunger, poverty, and injustice. And yeah, if you would be asked to walk 100 miles in a week, 15 to 20 miles per day, for which cause would you walk?
I've thought about this question, and there are so many things I think that I could do this for, really. But when I landed in questions that I've thought a lot about lately, in my essay I'm writing, or my thesis now I'm writing at uni, we're looking at children who have been sexually exploited online. And I've always been very driven to help children and to make sure our children are safe. So I think something connected to that would make it very easy for me to do it. So children who are objects for violence or sexual abuse or sexual assault, I could probably go way past 100 miles for that. So yeah, I choose that because I've been working with it a lot lately.
When I walk, I start thinking about why are we on Earth? What is life about? What is the purpose? And then sometimes I'm accompanied by people that walk with me for a couple of miles, or the whole full 15 miles or 20 miles. And then we talk about life, but also about spirituality and religion. And then oddly enough, very often about, what do you think is happening with the youth and religion and spirituality? So I'm always curious about this. So I ask, what do you see happening among your generation in terms of religion and spirituality? And is that different than, the older generation from your point of view?
I think it's different than maybe for the older generation. I think, especially in Sweden, religion isn't as strong or as a central part of the civilization and community as it has been historically. I mean, Christianity was very, very big in Sweden, and I think a lot of people have been baptized, for example, or went to church as kids, or like things like that. But I don't think a lot of youth anymore are very involved in religion. There are a few, absolutely, and I think, but there are also more religions. It's a broader spectrum, and there are also a lot of people who aren't religious. But I do think a lot of people are spiritual, and maybe more people talk about different types of spirituality than they do about religion. So I think there's still something there, and I think a lot of people I talk to, at least, I mean, they might not say they're religious. I don't think I would either. I can't connect myself to a religion and say I believe in this God or this like system, but I can say that I don't know. There are so many things I don't know, so I can't say like there is no God or there's no other like higher spirit or there's no other force behind this or this life or the things I get to do, or I don't know what happens after I die and whatnot, so I don't want to exclude it. And I have some sort of spirituality, and I've meditated a lot, and I've done things like that. So I can't say I'm like an absolute atheist either, but I'm not religious. And I think I have a lot of people I know and a lot of people in my generation that I think resonate with that, and probably would have maybe kind of the same idea, but it's different. Again, you spend time with people who are like you, and I have a few really religious friends, but not very many. And I think the church has a smaller role in society, at least in Sweden today, than it has had historically.
Yeah. Although what I understood when I was in Sweden recently is that everybody at birth is already part of the church, right?
Yeah.
So if you don't want to be part of the church, you need to take an action.
Exactly. And I mean,
Which
that
is
you're in the
interesting.
church is mostly that you pay tax. So, and I think a lot of people stay in the Swedish church and pay tax to the Swedish church because they appreciate the work the Swedish church maybe does with like people in poverty or in difficult situations, that there's a system that helps people, and not that they necessarily are Christian. So I mean, it's difficult, but a lot of people choose to leave the church since they're not religious, and it feels wrong to be a part of that then because they don't believe in that God. So yeah.
I often talk with my guests about what worries them at the moment, and then I also talk about hope. But the question that I would like to ask you is a lot of the more senior guests of mine, when I ask them where do you still see hope, they say in the next generation, is youth. And so my question that we come to my younger guests is, what do you think about that when people say, well, I still see hope in the younger generation, and how do you deal with that particular comment and observation?
I mean, I understand it, and I can see it. I think I have hope in this young generation as well, but I think it also annoys me a little bit because it's a way of like, not my responsibility. They've got this. They're going to be the change. We have hope in them. We don't really need to do anything. And I think it's a way of not taking responsibility for the fact that any generation alive today can actually make a difference that matters. And especially if we look at the climate and the climate crisis right now, that we need to make changes now. And the youth who are really driven in the questions, some of them aren't old enough to vote, so they can't affect politics, and the politics is what makes the decisions. So there I think it's it doesn't really sit quite right with me always, because I think it's a way of just taking yourself out from the situation, being like, oh, but they've got this, we have hope in them because we're done, it's too late. So I think it's a way of not taking responsibility. So that annoys me, actually. But I also believe in the younger generation, and I see a fire and a will and want to change. So, I mean, I understand it as well.
Now, talking about climate change and the problems that we're facing, what I try to do is make my listeners aware of the Sustainable Development Goals. It's not perfect, but I think that framework, kind of reminds us that we need to work hard on to ensure that we will have future generations. So there are these 17 goals that have been identified, and actually, it was a kind of a participatory process. A lot of people were involved. Again, not perfect. I know that you've heard about the Sustainable Development Goals because you were at the Inner Development Goals Summit. But if I ask you, if there is one thing that you would my listeners to know about the Sustainable Development Goals, what would that be?
I mean, first of all, I think you should know about them.
Mhm.
I lifted this yesterday when I was discussing with my friends that I was going to be in this podcast, and I'm like, do you guys, do you know what it is? Like, do you know the SDGs? So, I mean, step one, you should be aware, like you should know that they're there and see how you can be a part of it and be changed, because it's not, I mean, a lot of it is local politics or on a larger scale level, or where we need big decisions to make these changes. But as individuals, we can also make changes. We can pressure politics as well. We can make changes and see changes happen, so we have a sustainable world. So I think I think you should be aware. I think you should know what they are. I think you should understand it, and I think you should look for ways you can be a part of it, and what you can do to actually help. Because it doesn't have to be huge things always. And I think a lot of people are like, whoa, this is a lot. It's like, it's scary. It's a lot. This is so much pressure. So I do nothing, or I shut off because it's too much and it's too dark, and it's like, and I think people become very pacified by that. So I think you need to know, you need to like read up on it, and you need to find action. And I think that goes with any movement really, but with the SDGs that are very clear, I don't think it's not that hard to find things you can do and how you can be a part of it, and be a part of change. So yeah.
The latest one of the latest reports on the Sustainable Development Goals says that on average we are at only 15% of the goal. And things are mentioned that because of the polio crisis, the war, etc. But there is this growing group of people around the world that says, yes, okay, that might be true, but one of the reasons that we are also not in the right direction is because we never paid attention to the abilities, knowledge, and skills that you need as an individual and as a community. So they came up with 5 inner development goals that you're very aware of, being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting. I know that you in 2022 were asked to perform in the first Inner Development Goal Summit, and again this year. But what are your thoughts actually about the Inner Development Goals?
When I was first invited in 2022, I had no idea what it was. No idea. I was like, there's this thing, it's a huge summit. It's at the Stockholm concert hall. So it's this huge stage. It's the biggest gig I've ever had. And I'm like, this is cool. And then when we started discussing what poems, then they sent me the different categories, or the different inner development goals. And we're like, do you have any poems that go in any of these categories? And that's how I started learning about the inner development goals. And then I was there and I saw the summit and I was a part of it. And I thought it was such amazing work and so important work. So it was I asked to come back this year. I pitched myself and was like, hi, I'm still here. I'd love to come again. And I was allowed to come back and read some more poems, which was really nice. So yeah, I didn't know about it at all first, but now I'm quite invested in it. And I think I think it's really important. I don't think I can say enough how important I think it is that we look at these different inner development goals and how we, as individuals in our communities, as a society, what skills we need to learn to be able to reach the SDGs. Like, they really, really go hand in hand. And I think, like I was saying before, with the SDGs, a lot of people are like, whoa, that's a lot. And the inner development goals kind of make it very concrete in like what you can do for yourself in your companies and your communities, and what skills you need to develop to be able to reach there. And then it becomes easier and more hands-on as well, which I think is helpful for a lot of people. And I realized that being at the summit, people are like desperate for this. Like they're like open, like so open, and they're just taking everything in, and they just love it. They love the connection, they love being moved. All the speakers, they always have loads of art and artists, and it's like huge. And I feel like everyone's just like an open, they're just so open to experience and connection. And it's really nice to be there at the summit because you can see people connecting all the time, and we need that so much. And I think especially like in the society we live in today, and with all the entire digital life we live, and I think especially after COVID, when everyone was very isolated and didn't see each other and all of these things, I think we almost muted and forgot about our need for connection and closeness and being around other people. And I mean, the summit last year was off the back of COVID. People hadn't been at conferences or summits for years, and it was the same there. People were just like desperate for it. They really, really need that connection. So I think like I encourage everyone to read up on what the inner development goals are, to find a way to be a part of it, find a local hub, find a way you can like connect to this, because as soon as you're in, you don't want to leave. You just need to find your place for it. And there are hubs globally. And I think people should get invested because we need it, and we need those skills to be able to reach the SDGs. So I think everyone should take the responsibility in that as well. And inner development is, I mean, isn't that like the ultimate goal for everyone always, that we want to grow and become better and develop as humans? I mean, it's a skill book. Go find it, like do the work. So yeah.
Great. And you can also start a hub yourself, right? If there is nothing in your vicinity, or if you want to start your own, that's all fine.
Exactly.
You mentioned the word connection a couple of times.
Yeah.
What I hope this podcast will do is connect people and make the listeners realize that, okay, I might not agree with everything this guest is saying. Actually, I don't agree with most of what this guest is saying, but there is always something that you can connect to, and connection, maybe is the beginning of starting a conversation, a dialogue, and that's, I think, more important than ever in this world today. So I try to put that into something more concrete. So I'm bringing really my guests together, and I do that by sharing a question for you of the previous guest, and actually he came up with 3 questions for you that are related. It's about peace.
Where do you experience peace in your own life, and what helps you to promote peace? And do you dare to hope for peace for this world? In a way, these are 3 questions, but all related to the word peace.
Big questions. So the first one was where I find peace, right?
Yeah. Where do you experience peace in your own life? Yeah.
I think it is in connection with people who are close to me. When I'm with people who I don't need to perform, when I'm with them, where I can just completely be myself and they take me exactly as I am, and I can rest in the relationship. I think that's where I feel a lot of peace, and in connection with other people in general. Poetry is like that for me as well, standing on stage, feeling a connection with an audience where I'm very aligned. I think that's as close to peace as a feeling I can get, I think. And the other one was,
what helps you to promote peace?
I think that's taking care of myself. I mean, if I take care of myself, I can be a better support for other people, and taking responsibility for for myself and my actions, I think is really important. If you don't have your shit together, it's hard to help someone else. So I think I'm a better person when I take good care of myself, and I think that helps me promote peace. And being humble, I think is important. And if I dare to hope for peace in this world, I really want to say yes. I want to say yes, but I'm not sure I'm not sure I dare hope for that. I think people, as long as we have existed, have always been at war with each other in different ways. And I really hope we come to a place of peace, or at least more peace than we have now. But I think I'm a little bit hopeless, the fact that we haven't seen it yet. So will we ever see it? I don't know. But I'm going to do my best to promote peace. I think if everyone does that, maybe we'll make the world a little bit more of a better place. Yeah.
Your question for the next guest.
Difficult. I've been thinking about this, and I've had a hard time. Hard time deciding what I want to say. But I think I've landed in where in your life do you feel the absolute most present and aligned with yourself? So which moments in life do you feel as connected to yourself as possible, but maybe also in other ways, like when you feel connected and aligned and centered, like which areas in your life or which moments do you feel that connectedness? I think.
Great. In the US, Steve Hartman of CBS examines how one simple act of kindness creates a ripple effect. And normally I ask, what are your thoughts about this? But I'm not going to ask you. I'm going to ask you something else around this simple act of kindness. And the question that I have for you, because during this year's the Innovative Development Goal Summit, your poem you were talking about the butterfly effect.
Yeah.
So is that similar, according
Yeah.
to you, to the one simple act of kindness?
I think so. I mean, because it's like, there the metaphor is if a butterfly flaps its wings in one part of the world, that change in air pressure could cause eventually a whirlwind on the other side of the globe. So it's this tiny little thing that seems like it's nothing could have this huge impact. And I believe this is the same thing, that if you do a little thing here, the kindness will ripple. So it's the same thing as the butterfly effect, but it's more maybe focused on just the positive, like we can spread kindness. So yeah, I think it's similar. It's the same idea. I think that what we do has an impact. It matters. It will have an effect. So we really need to consider our actions and understand why we do things. So yeah.
Okay. If I would ask you now on the spot to come up with one simple act of kindness for this week, what would you do?
I would. I mean, I try to be kind in general in my life, but one thing I remind myself of now and then is to make sure I really reach out to people in my life who I care about, and maybe especially people who I haven't heard from for a while, or who are a little bit quiet, or who have always answered "How are you feeling?" with "I'm fine." Taking the time to ask and listen. I think that is something people need to do more. And I have to remind myself of that sometimes, to really take the time to check in on my loved ones and not just presume they are okay. And I think that's sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone else is just to listen and be there. So yeah, maybe that.
Music is very close to my heart. I have always a question about music as well. If I would ask you to mention a song or a piece of music that embodies for a big part, what you are about, which song or piece of music would it be and why?
This is also difficult. I think I love music as well, and I would have found it easier to give a song that I think explains me in some way, and because that's a completely different question. But I went through like my music library, what I like listening to, my favorite artists, how I can find like a good, and I landed eventually in Harry Styles' "Treat People with Kindness," which is an amazing song and a very happy, uplifting song. It's great. But I think kind of like I answered now about acts of kindness, that we need to treat people with kindness and have empathy and understanding for other people. And that might actually promote peace. So
Cool. You know, that song, I will add that song to a playlist that I started in Spotify. You should be able to find it by searching for hashtag Walk Talk Listen, and then you see all the songs that have been selected by the different guests, and it goes from classical music to hard rock to R&B, name it, or folk. Yeah, any message, invitation, or question for the listeners?
I always try to nudge people to be creative, to find a way to be creative. It's a really good way of connecting with yourself. And it doesn't have to be writing, and it doesn't have to be painting. It can be anything. But I think that's a little nudge I try to give people in general, and especially the older generation. Listen and ask your kids questions. I think we can learn a lot from speaking to children, especially. And then, yeah, watch my poetry if you want to, or book me for an event. That would be fun.
Yeah, and where can they find you?
I'm Antonia the Poet basically everywhere. So I have a homepage, that's antoniathepoet.com. I have an Instagram and a YouTube with the same name. I'm Antonia Eriksson on LinkedIn. So yeah, you can find me. My email is the same as well, antoniathepoet@gmail.com.
Okay, we'll make sure that we list your social media handles, your website, all in the podcast notes. Yeah, I would like to thank you for your willingness to talk with me today and to share your story.
Thank you.
Please keep doing what you do. It's great. Looking forward to that you will put yourself as a performer again during next year's summit, because I will be there again.
Okay.
I'm planning at least to go. Yeah, any question that I should have asked but I didn't before we conclude?
I don't think so, or nothing I can think of right now. Anyway, I don't think. I feel like I've talked enough.
That's great. Thank you so much, Antonia. And as I said, yeah, all the best with everything you do.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.